Hello, welcome back to Factorio. My name is Nasty. This is going to be the first video of a short series where I'm going to talk about what I've done over the last 3 weeks. I'm going to specifically, one of the things that I've been focusing on has been going and doing a lot of spring cleaning across Gleba, Aquilo, some changes to Vulcanus, and a lot of small changes to Nauvis. Fulgora has been slightly overhauled, but not very much. But like I've made changes to all the like basically every single planet, and I'm going to kind of break them down by each individual planet. We're going to start with the most exciting one, which is Gleba. I've leaned as hard as I possibly can to make a case for trains on Gleba in this particular in this particular video. So stay tuned if you really like trains. That's what we're going to be talking about. To be honest, one of the reasons that I have spent the last 3 weeks just playing Factorio has been I've kind of burned myself out on just the hardcore benchmarking. And that's one of the things that, like, if you're doing megabasing, it's like really good to go and do individual benchmarks and continue to push yourself to kind of like find what is going to be more UPS optimal. But honestly, for me, I kind of just got to a point where I felt like I wasn't playing the game as much as I really would like to be. So, especially after the Linux versus Windows benchmark that I wound up doing, I all of a sudden found like a love for like, I kind of want to be out of the editor. Like 90% of my time is spent in the editor, and I really would like to go and just play the game itself. Factorio is a beautiful game. I want to go and do that, and it just takes some time to do that. So that's what I've been doing over the last 3 weeks. We're going to start off in this mini series. We're going to start with Gleba. We're going to specifically talk about the complete overhaul that I've done of it, and I think you'll like it. I'm trying to give the best case for using trains on Gleba, not from a point of it being UPS optimal, but because I just love trains. So with that being said, that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to, through the series, we're going to go and talk about a very complete refactor that I've done of Aquila, which I'm really excited to talk about. I've made some minor changes on Vulcanus and Nauvis, but there's some key differences, so I'll focus on, this will be a 3-part series where I'm going to go and talk about Gleba first, then I'll talk about Aquilo, and then I'll wrap it up with some of the complete changes that I've made with Prometheum, and talking about how I've gotten to the point where I'm running about 2.6 effective science ESPM, so 115,200 of SPM at right around 90 UPS on average. So we'll get into that, and I'll see you in a second when I go and talk about the things I wanted to change in Gleba, and then the new stuff that we've got. Welcome to Gleba. This is the last state that you've actually wind up seeing Gleba since I've recorded any actual videos or like showcased it. One of the core problems that I wound up having, like as I was running research productivity and trying to scale it up, was that the pollution cloud was growing very large on Gleba just constantly as I'm running research prod. So one of the first problems that I wanted to deal with was, okay, these outposts don't give me adequate coverage. Okay, they do, but because I transitioned fully to solar already on Gleba, pentapods would wind up going and spawning here, going and taking out some of the solar here, and it was just a constant fight that I just didn't want to deal with. So I wanted to go and move these little outposts that I wind up having here, and I wanted to move them out much further onto the map so that I wound up having like core, like kind of like targets for pentapods to go and wind up going in wanting to go and attack. So that's one of the main things that I wanted to do, was move these outposts way further out, create a much larger perimeter, and so allowing the pollution cloud to grow. And that was one thing that I wanted to change immediately. The next thing that you're noticing right now is there's a lot of bot activity. So I'm still using pretty heavily robots here on Gleba. I wanted to, as much as possible, remove it. There's some good use cases for robots, like here for very quickly loading the train up. This is a short travel distance. You don't need a whole bunch of bots to wind up doing this. Like maybe like you could get away with 250 bots and be very happy with this small little setup for quickly loading trains. So I like this setup, but what I don't like about this is you can see how they're constantly moving to kind of fill up the buffer chests, and this is a lot of inserters here that I really don't like. So let's talk about the farm. So I'll start off with this about one of the things that I just detest about this current setup. So the way that I have quote unquote blocked the agriculture towers is I wind up going and looking inside the agriculture tower for if the output of the Yamako plants that it currently has is less than 50. So every time you harvest basically a Yamako plant, right, Yamako tree, you're going to get 50 of them. So anytime it's less than 50, it's going to go and enable, pick one up, and then stop. The problem with this is that it's relying... This in itself isn't bad. It's the output. The output and the way that this works is I wind up reading constantly the logistics network here. And this is a constantly changing signal as things rot, as things are going into different states. And the idea here is that, hey, whenever I have less than a train's worth of items, I'm going to go ahead and enable this so that all of the inserters will pull out the actual Yamako plant, or I'm just going to call them balls because it's easier for me to think about. So the red balls come all the way down here and then flow through here until we reach the chest. This is cool when you're running, because I run both research productivity and full speed agriculture science, so twice the speed. So this is kind of nice and then like a dynamic approach. The problem with this is that it's like almost impossible to tune because every single inserter has its own condition, and also some of the other things that I don't like is that the trees are kind of overlapping. So like you can see this one is harvesting the same plant, this one's also harvesting the same plant, so they have multiple targets that are the same. I'd like to spread those out much further. So the reason it's hard to tune is because I'd have to make a change to every single one of these inserters. Another problem that I have is like the overall growth area. This one's significantly better because I've belted almost all of the actual, in this case, the actual fruits that come in. But I'm still using bots to deliver the seeds, which I don't like. And this one is a much worse setup, where I'm still using like rare inserters for things, for example, and I wind up using completely bot-based in this area, so there's constant bot activity here. I transitioned a little bit to belt-based up here, and you can see them starting to harvest, but there isn't a rhyme or reason for why I've done this. So one of the core things I want to do is completely delete this, and move this all to one isolated farming area in this area here. That's one big change that I'm going to make. I also don't like the way that these trains are coming in, and this is the biggest problem that I have right now with Gleba. You see, I have this like central loading dock that's all here on the left, and then there's a central bus that comes across. So you can see a very, very slow moving when I'm running research productivity. It's going to speed up when I'm actually going and running the science, which will happen every once in a while. But my freshness on Nauvis is actually relatively low, is not where I'd like it to be. So if I look at agriculture science right now, I am at, when I'm running research productivity, and this is before I wound up scaling up, this is when I was running at, it's 100k, so 117k is the actual science that I wind up having. And you're going to wind up seeing that the freshness in the labs here is right around like 87-88%. I wanted to push this to at least 90% to reduce the, especially the amount of bots that I have. Like you can see all these bots that have to deliver extra amounts of agriculture science to these first 4 labs in here, and I wanted to at least cut it down to 3 labs that are actually getting fed. That cuts down the travel distance, especially for this back corner where they have to go and bring that agriculture science, and just in general, you can see just how much bot activity there is just from agriculture science. So that was a core thing that I wanted to change. So in order to do that, I realized that like fundamentally the way that this is laid out here, when the trains all come in, they prioritize the opposites of what you should be prioritizing for freshness. So, okay, we're prioritizing right now bioflux. That's good. The problem with this, though, is that every single thing afterwards, I'm prioritizing right now, and I'm saying priority because since this is a spoilable good, anything that's in the beginning of the bus is going to wind up being a priority for freshness. So I'm prioritizing the ability to go and create seeds as a back up method. I'm also prioritizing right now a pretty terrible build of creating carbon fiber, which you do need constantly for research productivity, right? So why am I prioritizing this? That doesn't make any sense. It's almost always using spoilage. So there isn't really anything in here that cares about it being fresh because it's a final good, right? And I'm going to sound a lot like I'm just getting down on myself here, but that's kind of the point is to hard evaluate these individual planets and redesign them as much as I can, right? So then I'm also prioritizing here the creation of, again, a finished good, iron ore, right? Why am I going and prioritizing that? Why am I prioritizing copper? Both of those don't make any sense for me to be prioritizing here because they're, again, just a finished good. Also, if you look at this design in general, one of the things that I don't like about it is that I'm using a lot of red inserters here, and I wind up, in general, this could be a lot more direct insertion based, which I would like to completely redesign this little cluster and make this just a better thing. I'm also just constantly belting with splitters here, the spoilage that's going across the belt here. And that's one of the things that I wind up ultimately that I want to change for that. Anyway, bringing this as we continue to go further down, again, more just finalized goods. Everything, pretty much every priority right now is for something that is not spoilable. And then that finally brings me all the way along this bus to the actual science setup. And in this setup, this is the thing I'm using the most in my actual base. So I should be prioritizing science as a first-class citizen. Like, I should be using it first, right? That's one thing that I want here is, if you think about this fundamentally, I want to get rid of a lot of the bot traffic that I have here and almost make it down to a complete minimum. I want to use belts and completely just bring everything in. I still want to heavily use trains because I think trains are cool. I wind up using legendary fuel for them, so that you can see that here in all the fuel delivery because of the increased vehicle top speed that you wind up getting. The acceleration is 475% with legendary fuel, so that was one thing that I definitely wanted to keep. So that's what I want to do. So I want to use trains. I want to have the first thing that the trains deliver to be the actual science. I want to flip that completely around so that I wind up using that instead. I also want to craft all of the rocket parts that I'm creating. Why am I using bots for this? For extremely high throughput green circuits. This should be completely just direct inserted, actually, should be the ultimate, like, best thing that I wind up doing for this. So that's my overall grievances with the base. So let me talk shortly here now about the blade and some of the things that I don't like with, like, the general mechanics of the strategy that I was originally employing for creating agriculture science. Here's a good example of when I'm running mining productivity and I'm not using Gleba at all, the way that the strategy that I had worked. So for agriculture science, I would wind up just letting it rot and sit inside these 3 ships that I'm running. So request 240,000 science, that's 2 rocket launches from Gleba, and this would just sit here and would slowly let it just effectively just overall die eventually. The problem with this is that for freshness on Nauvis, everything just winds up rotting, and very slowly you just wind up seeing here, we wind up accumulating spoilage, we wind up having agriculture science packs that are at 38% sitting in the labs. So that means that the transition going into research productivity was much slower because the freshness had to slowly go and get built up. So it would just spike, consume as much agriculture science as possible, and the transitions were just harder in general. To combat this, the way that I actually handle this is, and I still use this now, and I haven't gone and changed that. You're seeing right now there's a purge request that is, I have completely locked out because I was just turning it off. If this is turned on, what would happen when that individual purge is happening, this would create a timer for 45 minutes and would go and delete all of the agriculture science. Right now, when I just flip that button, you're going to see all the labs activate, and I wind up pulling on like a tick pulse here, all the agriculture science out of these labs, right? But you're seeing here that right now I'm not picking anything up because I have just spoilage here, and there is, it's slowly getting to the point where it's starting to bring these items out. That's because it's just rotting, and because I'm using bots to deliver the actual science, it isn't super consistent about the very first labs having the highest freshness and then the last labs having the lowest freshness, because there's non-deterministic like allocation here of the agriculture science packs, because it's just picking up whatever from the hub when it's bringing these in. So I wanted to belt those directly. That was one big major core change that I wanted to make. You can see here, very slowly, we're going and taking all of the agriculture science out, and we're slowly shredding it here. And you're seeing that this is like kind of occasionally taking stuff out. And that's also just because we're waiting on a lot of these belts that have spoilage on them to slowly get filtered out and eventually come onto the splitter that would filter it out. So it's just a slow throughput, so not a really great way of deleting it. So what I wanted to change was, ultimately, I don't want to let it rot, but I'd rather just constantly have a trickle running and dumping the unused agriculture science on a timer into space. The reason that's useful is if you look at the current way that I'm doing agriculture science and spoilage removal, you're noticing here I have a lot of inserters all over the place checking for spoilage, and on worse than that, it's throwing them into active provider chests. So I constantly have bots flying around like this, delivering, picking things up, going and taking spoilage out. All this stuff down here is all spoilage that is getting removed. And even worse, when it's not running, there's just constant bot activity of bringing spoilage out of the system. So that's an overhead that I wanted to eliminate. And also, those inserters are constantly scanning, because they're not clocked, all these buildings. So you can think about it, this building has an extra inserter, and especially if I actually go and create a deletion planner, you can just wind up seeing just how many active provider chests. These are all unnecessary inserters. So if we look at this, that's 730 inserters specifically dedicated to removing spoilage, which can be completely eliminated from this. Like if I look at this and I wind up saying, like, okay, out of the total number of inserters that I have here, and let's go and grab this as well. I have, okay, all right, so it's a lot. It's 2,000 inserters. But if, like, out of the stack inserters, which is the majority of the ones that I care about, if 700 of those out of the 2,000, that's 35% of them are dedicated to spoilage. So I can completely eliminate those by constantly just launching a little bit. So that's one thing that I want to change. So we'll talk about that in a second more in depth so that I can explain that new mechanism. The second problem that I have right now is I'm using a push system to push science, right? So there's a concept of, with trains, of pushing versus pulling, right? So one of the things that is, when I'm in a low throughput situation like this, I have trains very slowly unloading their Yamako into here. Because in this case right now, sure, I wound up just running a launch, so it wound up coming out. But you're seeing here just how long these trains are sitting here, very slowly unloading. And because they're now, I have so many trains in here for max throughput, that means that occasionally I'm going to have to go and create some extra jelly nut, like is happening right now, because I wind up running low on the seeds, because things are just rotting and turning into spoilage, because we have these trains just constantly sitting here, just slowly rotting away. So I want to change this so that if the train isn't used, that it's smart enough to go and say, hey, I'm going to go into a timeout zone so that I'm not actually going to go back into the network as quickly. So these are the main changes that I want to make. This is the overhaul that I want to do. So let's go, and I'm going to save it right here, and I will go and overlay immediately what the new Gleba setup looks like after I've completely redesigned everything. Welcome to the new Gleba. What you're going to notice immediately is the whole entire core of Gleba has been ripped out that used to be here, and I completely moved it to this new section. So you're also going to notice that the Yamako farm has been completely consolidated into this specific area now. The brains, but I can't remember the pink stuff, I haven't wound up actually changing at all. This is exactly the same that it was before, but the main difference is now there's an express route that directly delivers the items from here, and there's a direct route here. So these trains are never overlapping in terms of crossing paths. So that's one big change that they come in here. Another thing that you're going to notice is that now I have a lot more of these outposts. So this has greatly increased the potential range that I can handle. Because now when I'm running at a higher rate of research productivity, my pollution cloud is going to grow massively in many different directions. So by having these now outposts here, I have a much higher chance of actually eliminating anything with the trains that wind up going around and just scanning for any individual potential new nests that wind up growing. And it does happen now occasionally because even though I can run with my Spidertrons around and destroy all of the nests, these are here as a backup mechanism because I do run this space overnight to just continue to stress test the system. So knowing that it's working is a pretty big deal. Another thing you're going to notice here is that I've drastically reduced the actual bot traffic that is going around. So there is a very completely overhauled farming area now. So you're going to see here that if I look at the bots, there's a very isolated bot network that's down here, and that's very much by design. So the reason I have done this is I've created a pretty cool system, I'll wind up saying. The way that this works is this actually winds up kind of dynamically assigning and setting up these individual train stations based on how much I currently have in this logistics network. So if I wind up having too much in it because I wind up going and not using it enough, it will quickly go and open up more of these train stops to be enabled or disabled. I always have the outsides always enabled for constant throughput, and you're seeing that here. The trains are constantly picking up items, they're constantly going and dropping those things off. And as the speed of the whole base increases, depending on what my throughput needs are, this will actually request more trains to come here. So I'll talk through that here. The way this whole system works is I wind up requesting, here is the current amount of Yamako that I want in this network. So I'm reading currently the contents of the logistics network, and I'm comparing the delta between what I want, and I'm also reading all of the belts themselves. So I'm like checking what is the current full system that it has. And so you wind up seeing that this actually naturally clocks all of the agriculture towers. And you're seeing here they all enable for a split second here, and then all disable, creating a large burst of all of the actual plants, which is exactly what I want because of the way that I actually launch all of the agriculture science into space. It's one big burst of production. So by naturally, if I just did a constant throughput here, I'd have to redesign how the actual blades work here. And so by doing this burst production here, to quickly get and saturate the demand, I have more agriculture towers than I need, but it winds up going and taking them from all the different locations here, belting in all the seeds, which is a very big difference. And then we'll ride along with this train. What this does now is, or we can, I guess, grab this one and follow along with them. So we have now all these areas that bring all of the actual plants and to the main area. Then these can immediately go. They travel really quickly because of the fuel source that we have, the nuclear fuel here, and they come directly into this loading zone. So I've designed this very intentionally to always prioritize whichever one comes in first, because sometimes the signals really mattered here. I wind up creating here a rail chain signal to kind of say like, hey, stop here first. But the moment that this opens up, go ahead and move in. And okay, we have one edge case where this guy won out a little bit. So maybe someone who knows a little bit more about trains can win out a little bit, but this guy should be the next priority here. So in general, it's always first come, first in, first out, so FIFO kind of system. And that's the idea for the loading. So in general, this can sneak up a little bit, block the actual entrance like this, and then the next train can actually go. So that's kind of this concept, like the core concept here of just constantly bringing another train in and bringing them in. This is a constant flowing system. What you'll notice, though, is if any of these trains ever get to the point where it backs up and is in the loading bay for too long, like right now we're constantly launching right now because we're running research prod. But if they ever back up, what's going to happen is eventually I'm going to get to a point where I don't have the throughput that I currently need because I'm running right now individually just like a lower research speed, right? Because we're doing half the speed for research prod. Eventually, these trains are going to go to a timeout zone, which you're seeing here. So I have a condition set up on the trains that if at any point in time it is currently, I create a very specific condition. So when it goes to the requester, the requesters are now here. Whenever requester is going to be, and we were there, and we're over 6 seconds at that location, then that train means that it had too many fruits than it actually needed. It's immediately going to go and say, hey, right now, I wind up having, in this condition here, I have cargo in my inventory. It's less than the 8,000 that I can hold. I'm going to go very simply and go and empty my cargo inventory. So when it does that, it goes to this station here, which creates a timeout of 45 seconds where it just has to sit here and wait until its cargo is completely empty. One core thing that I'm doing is I'm directly inserting from the trains, and I'm bringing in the Yamako so that I can immediately go and create seeds out of it. That way I never have a seed, I don't have enough seeds here on the actual planet, and I can constantly go and reprocess them if I'm not using them. So this is a timeout zone where if I have too many trains in the network, they come here, they wind up going and getting the extra stuff is used and removed. There's a small kickoff that happens by a bot that goes and brings the initial amount of nutrients that we need, so I'm not constantly making nutrients. And then this just goes and recycles any excess of the actual jelly, and then turns it back into seeds. And I just have a very simple circuit here that winds up just checking, hey, anytime the jelly nut seeds are greater than or equal to 8, I wind up pulling them out, and I set the filter on this particular output inserter so that it goes and brings them. All those seeds now then and spoilage that I have on the excess will go down this little belt and then feed into the main area right here. So that leads me to, let's talk about the core mechanism for how this is now designed that is fundamentally different than before. You can notice that I've flipped everything on its head. The very first priority for every single output here is immediately going and feeding the science labs, or the science production area. You're also going to notice that there is almost no spoilage whatsoever of the inserters that are on here. I've removed them completely for just some very simple timers that just check for spoilage occasionally. Because these are constantly launching now, sure, right now we're doing research productivity, but I'll show you how I'm handling the excess science. So we're going to follow along with this design, and this is a design that Rajev and Largo wound up coming up with, so I'm using currently their ship design. You're going to notice here that when we're over Nauvis, we have too much agriculture science. So we're currently dumping it here into space. This is a concept that I got from Konage, who's also another YouTuber that is a Megabaser. This concept I really like because what it does is it's saying, hey, it's basically quote-unquote free to throw items into space and throw them away. It's like going into a chest. What's not free is this right here, where it's once the spaceship is moving, the agriculture science, like, it has to track that it's moving, and it increases your space platform update time. So to mitigate that, I have this timer here that checks only when I'm over Nauvis, and it winds up going and making sure that my velocity is less than 300 kilometers per second. And then it will start a timer to start dumping the agriculture science or spoilage, however much is in the actual system. And then it will do that for 860 ticks, and then for the remainder of this, it will wait for, in theory, that agriculture science to fly out here, and then the ship can only then start moving. I can tune this a little bit better, but this has already, like, in general, just been a balancing act between the full-speed agriculture science that I'm running versus when I'm just running research productivity. All these inserters are set to spoiled first, so this removes all the spoiled contents, and this overall keeps the freshness relatively high in here. So you'll have things that are all the way from 95%, and then coming down to 87% or so. I have 4 ships that are constantly going back and forth, constantly picking items up, but this is my end state to make sure that I don't actually have ever spoilage in this network here. So I've completely done away with all my fallback mechanisms, so I don't have those timers anymore that purge eggs, and I just have a very simple clock that constantly is acting like a pilot light. This was an idea I got from Stupid Fat Hobbit, also on YouTube, and just kind of creating a constant flow of eggs in case any of these ever need to pick up. So this is now, because it's constantly flowing, we're constantly launching rockets here. That means that I can get rid of these 700 plus inserters that were dedicated just for spoilage. And I can now completely belt all of the other potential spoilage that's here by just checking once every 1800 ticks, just for like, hey, maybe there is some spoilage in the system, so every 30 seconds I'll wind up just checking, and I just turn on real quick the spoilage, and I send a signal to all of them, and they'll just turn on, check if there's spoilage, and if not, don't do anything. So it's a very short pulse, so they're not constantly scanning. This is, otherwise here, that's like the main core concept that has changed. Other thing is I realized I didn't need anywhere near the amount of export here for the actual bioflux, because I'm not consuming anywhere near the amount that I had. I had 4 rocket silos here on the end of each of these pods for a total of 6 times 4, so 6, 12, 24 potential that I could shoot, so 24,000 at a time. I never needed that much. So I've opted ultimately for this relatively simple system here that is going to just basically launch just when is needed, and there's only 6,000 can ever get exported at any point in time. And that's all that I ever request in the actual ships, is the exact amount that I could launch in one go, so that I never am requesting more than that, and the bots are never taking over. The next thing that I've kind of changed is fundamentally, I used to recycle here on the end constantly nutrients. And if you look at this, there's a production graph of spoilage that I used to be creating. If you see this like very large spoilage indicator that's constantly here, I actually have to go farther back. There we go. I was making about 100,000 or 114,000 spoilage per minute. And then you see this sharp drop off. The reason for that is because I switched to just throwing it in a chest and letting it very slowly turn into spoilage here. So the big, large chest here just acts as a large buffer, and I have a simple circuit that is just on a timer pulling 3 swings out of this belt to keep it constantly moving, but then just throwing it directly into the steel chest so that it can rot. The reason is, if you look at the recipe for nutrient recycling, is you actually get more spoilage than you put in usually, right? So whenever you put 1 nutrient into the system, you're going to get 2 to 3 spoilage out of it. So you're actually having to recycle, and you have to burn a lot more items. So you're actually just increased overall the amount of items that I am generating purely by using a recycler. So this system ultimately was just much simpler in terms of not creating anywhere near as much spoilage when I didn't need to. That's what I've kind of changed there. Belting everything is still the same, but fundamentally, yeah, the trains now come and act with this push or pull system and then have a timeout penalty. Now, everything else down the line is now is going to not be needing to be constantly there's no freshness that's really required here. Now I've gone and created a new system here, which this is using a lot more direct insertion. And effectively, all this whole system does here is it just monitors whenever the iron ore drops below a threshold. It will then momentarily create a single, or maybe like 24 iron bacteria, which goes into the network. The bots like very quickly just bring it to a couple of these requester chests and fill it with iron bacteria to kick it off. And then that will go and create the iron bacteria cultivation. I'm realizing that kicks it off, and it very, very quickly goes and fills this. One thing I'm realizing is I need to turn on trash unrequested. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, because otherwise this will all get completely filled up, which I don't want. So this is very slowly over time getting filled up, but so go ahead and turn that on just so that when they actually do get enabled later on, they wind up going getting replaced. But you're seeing right now here the system, which is going and filling up the iron bacteria, and right now it's completely filled up. So okay. So that's the new system that uses a lot more DI, and then everything else just kind of shuts down if we're not using it. One thing I'm doing, and this is because I do plan on scaling up the base further, is I'm constantly recycling at the end of the line here the extra jelly nuts that I'm not using. This is a future refactor that I didn't have time to do yet, and it's to not have anywhere near as much throughput that I have on Jelly Nut. You can see here it's the same throughput as the Yumako, which I don't really want because it's a lot less that I'm actually using the Jelly Nut at all. So for that reason, I shouldn't be going and having to constantly upcycle this, but I have to currently do that so that I don't wind up running out of seeds. A really fun thing is you can use cars for this, and so that I can completely get the full throughput of the system, because this is going making 460 items per second, and this way I can go and get 4 inserters to be able to pull at max 480 items per second out of each of these biochambers, and then go directly in recyclers. So it's just a kind of a fun method to go and get as much out as possible. This backup here is an emergency backup because I once was running out of jelly nut seeds. And so there is a certain condition that will bring in an extra lane and bring all the extra jelly nut into this system here to get upcycled if it's needed. There's also a backup mechanism that I have here that's also circuit controlled to bring in Yumako and create seeds if it's needed. But I'm very much at ratio correct with Yumako, so this is almost never running and is completely unnecessary. So all of this kind of comes down finally into here, where I've created, and this you'll see this is a common pattern on all of the planets, I've been creating these little pods to wind up making all the rocket parts that I need. These are all clocked perfectly, and they wind up going and producing and starting and stopping, just using a kind of like a latching mechanism that monitors the belts when it's not needed anymore, and then stops all the clocks. So each planet is going to have their own way of making plastic or whatever those ingredients are. So whatever those planets are, I wind up feeding it and adapting it slightly to that planet. And you can see here that we're wind up making bioplastic. And I wind up feeding one of them specifically into a storage chest. And that's mainly just for the occasional moment that I need to go and upcycle carbon fiber, because my ships do lose occasionally some legendary carbon fiber based products. So this winds up just being there as a backup mechanism that will go and upcycle the tool belts to wind up going and creating the carbon fiber. And whenever I have, in this case here, I'm on the logistics network, when I have less than 30,000 in the system, it will go and press a check mark and go enable those. And I'm realizing that I think I have a complete backlog in this system because this should be running, but it is currently not because of, so I'll have to redesign this. Anyway, this is a constant ongoing thing. But the reason the plastics in the logistics network is just to provide occasionally whenever I wind up making some red circuits here, and it just brings it over to occasionally top up because the system. It's almost always I'm gonna run positive, or it's occasionally gonna need some more red circuits that are getting upcycled and then comes in here. So let's move on then to finally the carbon fiber production, which has been completely redesigned to use a lot more direct insertion here. So the way that I've designed this is now there's no spoilage on a belt, but one of the things I really like about this system here is I've got this iron bacteria recipe. This makes an absolute ludicrous amount of spoilage. You can see this makes up to 645 per second, and just makes about 16 iron bacteria. This is way over the amount than we actually need, so very occasionally we'll wind up recycling something and then going and getting destroyed. But you can see here this made 1.9 million here, and this has made 262,000 things to recycle. You could actually point the spoilage, the nutrients from the thing that we talked about before, directly into here with the recycler, and actually go and destroy the nutrients and have that come in here instead. The thing that I like about this system is that you're going to notice that this gets completely shut down and all the slots completely fill with spoilage. And then this system is then shut down effectively and can't input anything until all the spoilage is removed. I like this because it's more true to the actual Gleba kind of experience and allows then for this just to be a giant container of spoilage just waiting to go whenever we wind up needing to go and make some carbon fiber, occasionally when we're running research prod. All of this carbon comes down on a belt and then gets fed into the carbon fiber creators, and then those all go down in the belt. Effectively, this shuts down, or should shut down, the nutrient creation whenever this belt gets completely backed up, And ultimately that just goes into a buffer that can send the extra carbon fiber up to the ship whenever it comes by. So otherwise, what I'm doing at the end of the line is I'm upcycling the jelly nut, and that's because I occasionally do need to go and create a couple different byproducts. So one of them being stack inserters that I have to make legendary, but more so one of the biggest things is the capture bot rockets. And that's because I'm using those to go and create a couple things. One is captive biter spawners, and then more biolabs on Nauvis as I'm thinking about scaling up the base. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm just keeping this around. Eventually, once I get to the final target rate of the base that I want, I won't have to just constantly be recycling these items here. So then I'll probably remove this as the end of the line here. That's the reason I have to have constant seed production, is because this is slowly removing seeds from the whole system over time because of this brute force upcycling method. And then that's why I'm having to have all those backup mechanisms. Anyway, and for better or worse, talking about upcycling, I upcycle all the bioflux just to keep it constantly moving. Also, again, for moving things up. In general, though, I could just let this eventually turn into spoilage, which would be probably better for UPS than this thing, but that's the way that I'm currently handling it, because of just creating the legendary materials that I need for crafting other stuff. Otherwise, though, you're seeing here that there's very infrequently we have kind of bots moving around, which is a lot better. So this whole entire system here is completely botless. So, which has been kind of a nice change from the previous designs that I wound up having. Otherwise, that is the main overview of Gleba. So let me talk a little bit and go over to Nauvis, where I can talk about how I'm pulling the actual agriculture science out. Now, let's talk about the freshness that's there. So you're going to see for the first time that this is a very different hub design than I've had in the past. So I am heavily utilizing cars here. And in fact, if I'm just going to highlight this so that we can see this a little bit better, we'll bring this all out. You can see that these cars that are in here, and they're very intentionally placed in the way that they are, so that I can constantly have as many inserters coming out of the hub at the same time. And more specifically, the reason I'm doing this is to get the throughput demands that I want. So you're going to notice here that I have these inserters that there's 240 per second effectively. You can see that this is targeting the car and this is targeting the car. And then there's just some filters here to prevent this from putting too many items in the car itself. But you can notice here that the freshness overall, we've gone from like 87%, which was like the max that we were getting, and we're like now this is the worst stuff that is currently in the actual hub, because we are pulling the spoiled first out of the hub, so that we're not accumulating spoilage in here. So the worst stuff that's in here is currently at 90%, basically, which is great. So that's a huge improvement from the like 70% or 40% that was sitting in there occasionally. Now I'm doing something kind of clever, and this is totally cursed, and it depends on the order of how you wind up placing these inserters. You can see that this is inserter and this inserter can pull spoilage from the car. And so these can actually bring these down on this belt, and that's my exhaust belt that will bring spoilage down the line and then ultimately go and get burned. And so I have this mirrored on all the different sides. But now I've prioritized agriculture science because I'm running research productivity a lot more. And this has been an overall huge net positive. So that means that in the actual labs, we're now like at 88% in some of them. The freshest ones wind up being like more like 90%, which is great. And so ultimately in net effect, what that means is if I look at agriculture science here, we're hovering at right about 133,000 per minute that we are currently consuming. And compared to all the other sciences, you can see here that we have like 115K for the other sciences. So this is a little bit of an overhead of about 15,000 extra. Before, when I first tried to kick this off with Gleba running, this was like about 140, 145,000 per minute that I was consuming. So the freshness has gotten a lot better. So what are we actually launching from Gleba? because like you might be curious about like what your actual launch like freshness is. You can see here we're getting actually about 97% of freshness that's actually coming out of these, and that's actually way better than I was getting before. I was capping out at 95% because of those design choices that I had made. The fact that now when we go and are creating fresh net new science, the fact that we're getting 96, 97% is really, really good. There's diminishing returns as you try to continue to go and push freshness further. And there's kind of like a point of like, why would you want to continue to push it and like any more than you wind up actually needing? But 97 is pretty good. One thing that I could do is if I wound up saying, hey, I don't care anymore about running any of the other agriculture science based stuff. So if I wanted to run, if I don't care about refined flammables and stronger explosives, I could make the argument for cutting the amount of blades that I have in half because I don't need that kind of throughput anymore, and reducing the overall number of trains I have. I'd still want to be able to run at both speeds. So at 2.6 million and 5.2 million for agriculture science. So that's why I'm keeping this around and keeping this whole system in place. So if I was only running a lot less of these, I'd wind up having significantly higher freshness of the actual fruits that we're coming out of. So when this is running at full production speed, I wind up getting like 99 to 98% freshness of the Imako that's actually coming out of here. So that's actually a really cool thing because, and this is the one reason why I would say trains can be actually worth it on for this, is mainly just because of how fast I can get all of the actual fruit out directly out of here, and the trains can very, very quickly go and move it to where it needs to go. If I transported this on a belt, the overall freshness would be significantly lower coming over here. So that's a pro to it, is that you can kind of, you don't have to have the best speed spawn, in other words, and you don't have to kind of just keep picking different maps in order to get the best seed in order to get the trains. So trains are a way to ultimately allow you to do that, and this is my attempt, but just frankly of just like, I wanted to see how far I could push trains and using them. I have no idea. This is probably not UPS optimal at all to be going and bringing all these the ludicrous amount of trains that are like in the system. Like if we look at the overall amount of trains that we have 9 Yamako trains that are constantly moving throughout the network. We have then and 7 of the jelly nuts. So you're seeing here that they're trashing a lot of them because there's too many of them, but I've needed this kind of throughput if I'm running at full research, full speed. So science. So with that being said, this is the main overhaul of Gleba that I've been wanting to do for quite some time to ultimately get the system to be more what I've wanted and more structured in the way that I wanted to see fit for prioritizing the actual things that require higher freshness compared to all the things that don't. So the least priorities are all down here that wind up going and creating all the individual products that we wind up needing. So that is the overhaul that I've done on Gleba and the new hub layout that I've wound up doing. And ultimately, that's what's improved overall my entire Gleba experience, and has net resulted in a pretty decent UPS gain from just, at least it's more of a smooth UPS that I have right now. I have no idea if it's better. I didn't benchmark it. That's been the whole point of this like 3-week sabbatical, has been I'm not doing benchmarking. I'm just having fun with my current base. And also just aesthetically, this is such a like beautiful kind of like organic looking like industrial huge farm, doing all kinds of like fun little squiggly stuff here with getting all the fruits up. So anyway, this was more of just a more aesthetic kind of build that I wanted to do, to just have a very unique approach that I don't think anyone else is probably going to wind up doing this in a Megabase, and I wanted to try it. So that this is my attempt at using trains as a first-class citizen here on Gleba. You'll probably not see this in other Megabases, so... And if I go and redesign a Megabase, I probably won't do the same system again. But this was a super fun way of creating a large train network, setting everything up. So, with all that said, thank you so much for watching. My name is Nasty, and I'll see you in the next part of this mini-series. Have a great day. Oh, and by the way, I figured out what was wrong with my my current upcycling build. I can't just randomly go and pick up the items that are the tool belts that are in here because this backs up. What I need to do is I need to sort ascending, so create the lowest items first so that they move through to the end of the line here. And now you're seeing a good, nice, constant stream of red circuits and also the carbon fiber. So yeah, that was the current problem in case you're curious about it. Anyway, so that's good. Then Megabase won't actually die because I don't have the carbon fiber that I need for constant destruction of random ship outages. Alright, see you in the next video.